The Wounded Child Governs Your Adult Life, Michel Foucault. This video analyzes how childhood traumas and absences become the wounded child that unconsciously directs adult life, manifesting in anxieties, burnout, and the chronic need for validation. It explores the concept of the false self and the internalized critical voice, explaining that real maturity begins by stopping the repetition of painful patterns from the past and consciously choosing freedom over obedience to the traumatic script. Number wounded child, number false self, number critical voice, number psychology, number childhood trauma, number emotional maturity, wounded child, childhood trauma, false self, critical voice, emotional immaturity, psychology, Carl Jung, Alice Miller, Donald Winnicott, Erich Fromm, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Kierkegaard, Michel Foucault. Unconscious, repetition, compulsion to repeat, adult maturity, self-esteem, abandonment, rejection, patterns, self-sabotage, emotional dependence, conditional love, wounds, freedom, consciousness, self-help, personal growth, therapy, relationships, emotional bonds, anxiety crisis, burnout, attachment, healing, philosophy, personal development. You might be 40 years old, driving an expensive car, leading a team, paying bills on time, making grown-up decisions. But all it takes is a sideways glance, an out-of-place, a minimal absence, and that's it. You are back to being the 8-year-old child crying alone in the room, feeling rejected, forgotten, useless. Most of the adults you know, perhaps even you, are being guided by childish versions of themselves that never truly grew up. They only learned to disguise it. They put a suit over abandonment, used productivity to hide their hunger for affection, and gave sophisticated names to basic wounds: stress, anxiety, impulsivity, low self-esteem. But behind the clinical vocabulary lies a raw truth. Childhood did not pass. It hid. This is what almost no one wants to admit. That the anger that explodes in traffic, the fear of exposure, the paralyzing jealousy, the need to please everyone, are not free choices. They are infantile mechanisms operating in an adult body. The French philosopher Michel Foucault said that power operates best when it becomes invisible. The same logic is valid for trauma. It dominates when we forget it is there. And perhaps that is why so many people repeat the same mistakes. They marry versions of the absent father. They try to save versions of the depressed mother. They sabotage themselves on the eve of their own conquest. Not because they are irrational, but because, without realizing it, they are obeying scripts written when they still did not know how to write. The wounded childhood is not a memory. It is an operating system. And you, even though you think you are in command, might just be running the script. This video is about that, about the wounded child that lives in you and that, perhaps, until today, governs everything you are. And what follows, you will not be able to ignore. Echo's body disappeared. Her voice remained. In the Greek myth, Echo was a nymph in love with Narcissus. Condemned by Hera not to speak of her own free will, she could only repeat the last words she heard. When she tried to declare her love to Narcissus, she could only echo what he said. He rejected her. She consumed herself. And, according to legend, only her voice remained. The voice, repeating phrases of others, forever, unable to say what she felt. That image, of a voice surviving without a body, condemned to repeat what it hears, is one of the most brutal metaphors for what happens to the wounded child. Because one of the greatest invisible legacies of childhood is the internalized voice. The one that, years later, you still hear without realizing it. The one that calls you stupid when you make a mistake, that says you are not enough, that tells you to shut up, that mocks what you feel, that demands perfection, that demands everything from you all the time, but never welcomes you. Most people grow up with a voice like that, planted by fathers, mothers, teachers, religious leaders. Voices that did not teach, they accused, that did not educate, they humiliated, that did not protect, they frightened. And the cruelest thing is that you grow up, but the voice does not change. You can become a doctor, lawyer, artist, entrepreneur, but that voice still treats you like the guilty child from before. It does not need to be shouted. It lives in the silence between your thoughts. And like echo, you end up repeating what you heard without knowing you are trapped in that echo. Alice Miller, one of the greatest psychoanalysts of the 20th century, wrote, "The body never lies. Even when the mind rationalizes, the body screams the truth." And one of the truths the body carries with insomnia, with gastritis, with panic attacks, with emotional blocks, is that you grew up believing you could not be who you were. And so you learned to monitor yourself, to punish yourself, to adjust, to be an edited version of yourself. That is the function of the critical voice, to keep you in your place. But that place is not freedom. It is a prison disguised as discipline. And the most tragic thing is that often that voice becomes your compass. You guide yourself by it to make decisions, choose paths, even raise children. You end up reproducing the same logic that wounded you without realizing it. Because the echo that lives in you begins to resonate in others. Today, many adults believe they are in control, but they are only obeying old, automated voices repeated like a sentence. That laugh they made you swallow as a child, you still hold it in. The rage they forbade you to feel leaks out in explosions you do not understand. The doubt they taught you to swallow paralyzes you every time life demands a step of courage. Deep down, the voice you carry is not just a symptom, it is a program. And until you identify where it comes from, you will continue to live to obey it. That is the first lesson. Every time you criticize yourself automatically, it is not you speaking. It is someone from the past using your mouth. True immaturity hides behind the performance of maturity. This is the disturbing thesis that few have the courage to face. Not every adult is mature. Many have only learned to simulate. And worse, the more successful, efficient, or admired an individual becomes, the harder it is to see that behind the performance, what exists is a wounded child afraid of being exposed, perhaps. Kierkegaard wrote, "Most men are unaware of themselves. They live under a borrowed identity, busy being what others expect." In other words, there are adults who live as characters they created to protect themselves from pain. They are competent, controlling, strong, funny, sociable, but all of this is armor. They are masks molded not by freedom, but by the need for emotional survival. This is where the central concept of psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott comes in, the false self. According to him, when a child perceives that being authentic results in rejection or punishment, they learn to adapt to the environment. This adaptation, initially strategic, becomes a way of being. Over time, the false self strengthens, while the true self retreats, and the adult who emerges seems functional, but lives an empty existence, without spontaneity, without real pleasure, only fulfilling roles. This is not an abstract theory. It is confirmed every day in the silent biographies of millions of people. Adults who only feel secure when they are in control, who only feel valuable when they are productive, who only feel loved when they please. People who never relax because deep down they believe that if they lower their guard, they will be abandoned again. This way of living is not autonomy, it is chronic vigilance. Nietzsche already said, "Become who you are." But for that, it is necessary to discover who is behind the mask. And the path is painful, because it demands facing a fact that the ego hates to admit, that much of what you call personality is, in reality, defense. That much of what you call choice was, in reality, fear. The tragedy is that the false self is rewarded by the world. It gains promotions, praise, followers. Society rewards performance, not authenticity. But internally, that false self charges a very high price, a profound disconnection from oneself. That is why so many adults feel empty, even though they have everything. Because deep down, they never stop being that child who felt insecure, unwanted, or wrong, and only learned to survive by pleasing, controlling, or winning. this is the dead end. As long as you are unable to exist without the mask, you have not yet grown up. True maturity is not measured by financial stability or emotional mastery. It begins when you stop living to avoid pain and start living with the freedom to be. Nothing shapes us more than the love we did not receive. It is a raw contradiction. Human beings are biologically programmed to love and be loved, but much of humanity grows up without experiencing real love, love that came with conditions, affection that depended on good behavior, presence that came with demands, approval that depended on performance. And this leaves a mark that does not disappear. It only changes form. The French philosopher André Comte-Sponville wrote, "To love is to say, you shall not die." And that may be the most devastating definition of what it means not to have been truly loved. Living as if you were always on the verge of disappearance, exclusion, replacement. That wound appears where you least expect it. In disproportionate jealousy, in the desperate search for validation on social media, in the feeling that no one loves you in the right way, in the need for control, in emotional explosions, in the absurd fear of being abandoned. And the paradox is this: the more you need love, the less you manage to receive it, because every unrecognized lack turns into an effective trap. You start to love to be saved, not to share. To relate to fill holes, not to build bridges. Erich Fromm, in The Art of Loving, got straight to the point. Most people think loving is easy. The hard part is finding the right object. But what do they forget? It is that loving is an art, and like any art, it demands knowledge and effort. The problem is that, for those who were never loved consistently, love is not an art, it is a minefield. Every gesture becomes suspicion. Every absence becomes abandonment. Every frustration becomes rejection. You do not live the present. You relive childhood. This is more common than it seems. Research from the Harvard Study of Adult Development, the largest longitudinal study ever conducted on adult life, showed that the quality of close relationships in childhood has a direct impact on how adults relate decades later. It is not drama, it is structure. And no matter how rational we become. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer wrote that we are like hedgehogs. We need proximity to keep warm, but in approaching, we wound each other with our own thorns and those of others. Then we move away, then we come back, then we suffocate, then we implore. It is a cycle, a pendulum between the fear of being invaded and the panic of being ignored. That is the wound of the love that never came. It is not erased by time. It disguises itself as independence, coldness, seduction, hyper-romanticism, self-sufficiency. But the truth is that the adult who was not loved in the right measure does not learn to love. They learn to survive emotionally. And the cruelest thing is that this adult still believes they need to deserve love, as if it were a prize, not a right. It is this that needs to be undone. Because effective maturity begins when the person understands that the love that was missing will not arrive retroactively, but that they can learn not to be a hostage to the absence. That is the central point. You either understand that it was not your fault, or you spend your life collecting from the world what it can never pay you. It is Tuesday, 7 in the morning. You wake up with your mobile calling you to a world that is not waiting for you. 3 work notifications, 2 ignored messages from the night before, and an overdue bill. But it is not just the schedule that weighs heavily. It is the feeling that all of this has already happened 1,000 times before. You swear you are living, but deep down, you are just repeating. The same people, the same conflicts, the same relationship mistakes, the same triggers, the same fears, the same self-sabotage gestures disguised as bad luck. This is how it works. The past does not die. It repeats itself. The difference is that now the faces have changed. The scenario changed, but the script is the same. Freud called this compulsion to repeat, an unconscious mechanism by which we try to reenact unresolved, painful experiences, unconsciously hoping that, this time, the outcome will be different, but it almost never is. You grew up with an emotionally absent father. Today, you fall in love with people who are never truly available. You are criticized for everything you did. Today, you choose bosses who treat you with contempt. Did you learn never to trust? Today, you destroy any relationship that requires surrender. It is not a coincidence. It is a reunion with trauma. Adult life is full of traps that seem new, but are old with different makeup. You change jobs, but you repeat the same frustration. You end a relationship, but you enter another with the same void. You change cities, routines, social circles, but the feeling of inadequacy follows you like a shadow. This is because the pattern is not outside. It is in you. And if you do not see it, it will repeat itself until it destroys you. It is not an exaggeration. According to data from the American Psychological Association, unconscious patterns of attachment and unprocessed trauma have a direct impact on professional choices, relationships, and mental health, even in highly functional people. But this does not need statistics. It is enough to observe. It is enough to pay attention to the void you feel right after a victory, to the euphoria that turns into boredom, to the passion that turns into a prison, to the expectation that turns into rage. The raw truth is, you are not trapped in a routine. You are trapped in an emotional script that began before you knew what choice was. And the more you ignore it, the more it repeats. Until life becomes that a sequence of painful déjà vu where everything seems familiar and nothing makes you grow. The only way out begins with the courage to ask, what exactly am I trying to repeat? And, mainly, why do I keep trying to get from the present what the past could not give me? Until you answer, the repetition continues. And no, it is not a coincidence. The past does not need to end. It needs to lose control. This is the final truth. There is no cure in the romantic sense. There is no return to innocence. There is no pure beginning, but there is choice, and that changes everything. After all, we have seen the voice you carry unknowingly, the mask that became identity, the love that was missing and still controls you, the patterns that repeat themselves like punishment. The conclusion is not comforting, but it is liberating. The wounded child that governs your life only has that power because you still obey it. And here is the hardest point to admit. You are not guilty for what you lived, but you are responsible for what you continue to allow. Yes, it was real. The absence, the criticism, the fear, the demand, the conditioned affection, all that molded you, but it can no longer justify your paralysis. Childhood left marks, but it no longer has power of attorney to sign your decisions. You can keep repeating, or you can stop. You can keep looking for the love that did not arrive, or you can accept that adult life is not about receiving, it is about sustaining. Freedom does not come from the forgiveness of others, nor from retroactive justice. It comes from a radical act of consciousness, recognizing that you carry that pain and, even so, choosing something different. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it destiny." And perhaps this is the most mature meaning of healing. Not turning it off, not romanticizing it, not dramatizing it, but stopping the obedience to the automatic script, looking inward and saying, I understand where this came from, but I no longer need to follow that path. You do not go back to being who you were, but you can finally decide who you will be, and that choice only you can make. Before ending, I want to speak directly to you, who made it this far. If this video touched you, if you recognized in every word a hidden part of yourself, know this, you are not alone. There is a type of person who feels the weight of the world before they know how to explain it, who carries deep questions in silence, who thinks too much, feels too much, remembers too much. This channel exists for you and with you. To all who are already members, who support with generosity and constant presence, thank you. You are not numbers. You are the invisible foundation that sustains this project. Every comment, every message, every gesture of trust, all of this transforms this space into something alive. And for those who want to go even deeper, the invitation remains: pessimistic philosophy, the lucid darkness. This is not a common course. It is a journey, an immersion without promises of relief, but with the rare opportunity to see the darkness with lucidity and not with fear. Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Cioran, Camus, names that do not offer cheap comfort, but a brutal and, therefore, liberating clarity. If you feel you have moved past the phase of illusions and are ready to face what almost no one faces, you can become a member and receive exclusive content, participate in more intimate discussions, and be part of the construction of what is to come. Or you can use the Super Thanks feature below, a simple way to give back if this video made a difference to you. But above all, if you watched this far, if you commented, if you shared it with someone who needed to hear it, that is already an immense gesture. You help keep alive a rare community of people who think, feel, and have the courage not to run away from the truth. Thank you for being part of this. We continue together, with lucidity, with wounds, with courage. See you next time.